The meal tray that shouldn't exist. The steel food slot slammed open at 5:17 a.m. Michael had been awake for hours, sitting in the same rigid position on the edge of his concrete bed. ADX Florence runs like a machine, no surprises, no mistakes. But today broke every rule. Inside the metal slot was a meal tray unlike any he had ever seen. No vegetables, no milk carton, no bread. Just one sealed plastic pouch with a handwritten note taped to it. Don't eat this. Watch. His gut tightened. Nothing at ADX changes. Nothing enters a cell unless the prison authorizes it. So, how did this tray get here? Before he could breathe, a tapping started behind the wall. Slow, precise. Like someone was trying to warn him. The tapping stopped, and a weak voice whispered through the vent. They're testing us again. Michael stepped back from the tray, just as the light snapped off, plunging the cell into total darkness. The routine that keeps them human. Survival at ADX isn't about strength. It's about rhythm. A strict schedule becomes the only thing that keeps the mind from collapsing. Meals arrive like clockwork. 5 a.m., 10:30 a.m., 4 p.m. Always early. Always fast. Always silent. Michael built his entire sanity on those trays. He arranged the food by color. He counted each bite. He chewed slowly to stretch the only stimulation his day provided. What outsiders see as prison food, ADX inmates see as structure, the only reminder that time is still moving. But on the day the mysterious pouch arrived, Michael realized something chilling. ADX wasn't just observing inmates. It was experimenting with them. Nothing unusual ever enters a cell unless someone in the system wants it to. How ADX inmates think in total isolation. The human brain begins to unravel in silence. ADX isn't just isolation. It's absolute isolation. Michael spent years hearing only three things. His own breathing, the hum of the vents, his thoughts getting louder. He began replaying conversations from his past. He counted dots in the concrete. He paced the same 6 steps hundreds of times. In ADX, thinking becomes your only activity and your worst enemy. He questioned everything. Was it really morning? Did lunch already happen? Was the whisper real? Or did his mind create it? The brain doesn't just get bored in ADX. It breaks. Slowly. Silently. The art of staying sane. Michael learned something every ADX inmate eventually discovers. You don't stay sane by being strong. You stay sane by being structured. He built small rituals to keep his mind from collapsing. He folded his blanket the same way every morning. He wiped the concrete floor with a wetted sock until it was spotless. He created mental games to keep his brain active, like counting how long it took for a guard to finish a tier check, or memorizing every crack in ceiling. These habits weren't hobbies. They were lifelines. Thinking became a survival skill. Food, sleep, movement, breathing. Everything had to be controlled. If Michael felt panic rising, he paced in slow circles. If he felt loneliness closing in, he forced himself to recite stories from his childhood. If he felt slipping thoughts, he focused on physical sensations. His heartbeat, his breathing, the coldness of the steel sink. ADX wasn't punishing him with violence. ADX was punishing him with silence. The quieter his world became, the louder his thoughts got. So Michael constructed a mental shield, small routines that kept the chaos out. But as the days passed, he began noticing things he couldn't explain. The vents shifted air at odd times. The lights flickered only in his cell. The tapping behind the wall returned in patterns that didn't match pipe movement. Michael tried ignoring it, but the mind in isolation is curious, dangerously curious. By the end of the week, he knew it wasn't a random noise. It was communication. Someone behind the wall was trying to reach him or warn him. How ADX breaks the body too. Isolation damages the mind first, but slowly, painfully slowly, it begins breaking the body as well. Michael's muscles weakened despite constant exercise. His joints ached from the cold concrete. He slept poorly because the lights never turned off, and the noise of the vents forced him into shallow, restless cycles. After months of limited sunlight, his skin grew pale and his energy dropped. Even blinking felt like effort. Every meal tasted identical. Every day felt identical. Every hour pressed weight on his bones. Medical checks came, but they were brief. A flashlight in the eyes, a few questions, a note scribbled on a clipboard. No one asked how he felt emotionally. No one asked about his confusion or his panic episodes or the strange noises he couldn't explain. The worst part was the stillness. His cell was a box that didn't allow movement, creativity, or expression. Even stretching felt useless. He felt himself shrinking, both physically and emotionally. Then came the hallucinations, small at first, a shadow moving when nothing moved, a distant sound that didn't exist, a memory that didn't feel like his own. ADX didn't need to touch him to break him. His own biology did the work. When the mind starts talking back, by the 5th year, Michael understood the most dangerous part of ADX. Your mind eventually becomes your cellmate. He began having internal conversations. At first, they were normal, arguments from his past, memories of family, imagined scenarios. But then they became more structured, clearer, almost like another version of himself was speaking back. This voice wasn't aggressive. It wasn't frightening. It was comforting, and that terrified him the most. The voice told him to stay calm. It told him to follow routine. It told him that the strange meal pouch was a warning, not a threat. It became a counselor, a friend, a companion. But Michael knew the truth. This voice existed because the prison had taken everyone else away. He tried fighting it. He tried staying silent. He tried listening to real sounds, footsteps, vents, doors, but they grew rarer as the voice grew clearer. Isolation wasn't empty anymore. It was crowded with his own thoughts, some of which weren't his. The day the tapping behind the wall aligned perfectly with the voice inside his head, Michael realized something chilling. ADX wasn't just breaking him. ADX was reshaping him. When ADX tests your breaking point. After years in ADX, Michael noticed something no one had ever warned him about. The prison tested inmates. Not physically, psychologically. Patterns shifted. Routines changed slightly. Guards altered walking routes. Light flickers happened in only one cell, never the others. These weren't accidents. ADX Florence was studying how isolation shaped a human mind. Sometimes his lunch tray arrived 2 minutes early, sometimes 2 minutes late. To most people, that means nothing. But when your life depends on routine, even a tiny change feels like a warning. Michael's heartbeat spiked. His thoughts scattered. He felt watched, evaluated, pushed toward the edge of something invisible. He realized ADX wasn't reacting to the inmates. It was observing them. What happened when they heard noises? What happened when routine cracked? What happened when the mind started talking back? The psychological experiments felt subtle, almost hidden, but Michael sensed them. He sensed them every time guards stopped whispering at the far end of the tier. He sensed them every time an inmate suddenly broke down. He sensed them when his walls vibrated for no reason. The worst day came when the meal slot stayed closed long after breakfast time. Michael waited, and waited, and waited. Hunger grew. Anxiety grew faster. He paced the cell, palms sweating, mind racing. Was this punishment? A test? A mistake? 10 minutes later, the tray arrived. Late, silent, deliberate. That small delay shook him deeper than any punishment ever had. ADX didn't break inmates with violence. It broke them with uncertainty. The moments when inmates snap. Michael heard it before he saw it. The unmistakable sound of someone losing their grip on reality. It started with pacing, then muttering, then a scream that ripped through the hallway. Another inmate was breaking down. ADX had claimed another mind. The screaming lasted nearly an hour. Then it turned into crying, then into silence, so heavy it felt like the air itself pressed against the walls. Michael knew exactly how it felt. He was inches away from the same collapse. Every inmate had a limit. Some lasted months. Some lasted years. But eventually, everyone hit the point where the silence became too loud, the loneliness too heavy, the routine too suffocating. Michael told himself he would never snap. He told himself he was stronger than the walls. But the voice in his head, the one that had grown louder and clearer, whispered otherwise. "You're close," it said. You're closer than you think. He fought the voice. He tried to anchor himself in reality. But ADX doesn't fight fair. It isolates you until your own mind becomes the enemy. The day he finally broke wasn't dramatic. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply stood in the middle of his cell and forgot what day it was. Not because he lost track, but because he no longer cared. That was the first time Michael feared himself. The human need for connection. Michael discovered the deepest truth about ADX during his 8th year inside. Humans are not built for silence. The mind can learn to endure hunger, cold, pain, and boredom, but not the total absence of connection. He found himself counting footsteps just to feel another presence. He leaned closer to the vent whenever he heard the faintest hint of breathing. Even hearing a guard's keys jingle became strangely comforting. The sound meant someone was near, someone real. He started talking to himself, not because he was losing control, but because he needed to hear a voice, his own voice, something human inside an environment designed to erase humanity. Some nights, he whispered stories from his childhood, retold moments he'd forgotten, or repeated old conversations word for word. He didn't care if it sounded strange. In isolation, words were survival. Silence was the enemy. Connection didn't have to be deep. It didn't have to be emotional. It didn't need meaning. It just needed to be there. A single call from a distant cell could lift his spirits. A guard saying, "Back up," during a meal delivery could energize him for the entire day. He began realizing how powerful interaction was, and how dangerously rare it had become. But the longer he went without hearing anyone, the more his mind made its own company. He started imagining responses through the vent. He created mental versions of people he missed. He constructed conversations and waited for answers that never came. The line between memory and imagination became thin. Sometimes he wasn't sure if he heard something real, or if it was just his brain filling the silence. The isolation took a shape. It wasn't just emptiness. It was suffocating quiet that pressed against him, demanding attention. He felt it when he tried to sleep. He felt it during meals. He felt it during the long, empty hours of the night, when all he had was a hum of the vents. Humans need voices. Humans need faces. Humans need other humans. And ADX took all that away. Still, Michael held on to something tiny but powerful. Hope that someone else was listening, that another inmate nearby was awake, thinking, existing. He didn't need a friend. He just needed proof that he wasn't alone in the universe. And one night, he got it. The strange comfort of routine. By the 9th year, Michael experienced something he never expected. Routine became comforting. The same lights, the same walls, the same sounds. The predictable rhythm that once suffocated him now felt familiar, even safe. He began depending on it, the way someone depends on breathing. Every detail of the cell became an anchor in a world that offered nothing else. He knew exactly how long it took for the guard to reach his door during rounds. He knew the tiny flicker the lights made every few hours. He knew the hum of the vent so well he could tell by sound alone if the airflow changed by even a small amount. ADX had reshaped him. The cell no longer felt like punishment. It felt like the only environment his mind could function in. When routines were disrupted, even slightly, Michael panicked. Lunch arriving early could send his thoughts spinning. A guard walking in a different rhythm made him anxious. A missed noise, a changed smell, a slower lock mechanism. Each small shift felt like a threat. His mind clung to monotony because it was the only stability he had left. He started fearing the outside world. Noise frightened him. Movement intimidated him. Bright colors felt overwhelming. The idea of being around people again made his stomach twist. The world he once knew now felt too unpredictable. The terrifying realization was this. Michael wasn't simply adapting to isolation. He was becoming dependent on it. The cell wasn't breaking him anymore. It was shaping him. And that was even more frightening. When the outside world feels unreal. News came unexpectedly. Michael had been scheduled for a transfer review. A chance, however small, to leave the cell he had lived in for nearly a decade. When the counselor spoke to him through the door, Michael struggled to answer. Words felt heavy. His throat tightened. His mind scrambled to form responses. It had been years since he spoke conversationally. The counselor asked simple questions, but each one felt like a test he wasn't prepared for. Human interaction had become overwhelming. When the short evaluation ended, Michael sat on his bunk replaying every question. His brain wasn't used to processing tone, expression, timing, or emotion anymore. He felt drained, not because the review was difficult, but because the interaction was too real. Over the next few days, he couldn't sleep. His mind raced with fear, not fear of isolation, but fear of leaving it. The outside world felt enormous, loud, unpredictable. People talking, walking, staring. It all felt like too much. Michael wasn't sure he could function outside the controlled silence of ADX. He began worrying about simple things. How to talk to someone, how to stand around others, how to make eye contact, how to walk without feeling watched. He realized ADX hadn't only removed his freedom, it had removed his instincts. Freedom suddenly felt like another form of fear. And Michael didn't know which world scared him more, the one inside the cell or the one waiting outside it. The fear of freedom. As the review date approached, Michael found himself experiencing something he never imagined. Fear of leaving ADX. The outside world felt like a myth, loud, chaotic, unpredictable. He imagined crowds, movement, noise, faces, voices, all things he had lived without for years. What used to be normal now felt threatening. He had become accustomed to the stillness, the silence, the tight routines. Freedom no longer seemed like escape. It seemed like exposure. Michael had spent so long in a world where every sound had meaning that he worried normal life would overwhelm him. He feared not knowing how to talk to people. He feared forgetting basic social skills. He feared being judged for how much ADX had changed him. The system had forced him into isolation, but time had trapped him there. Even thinking about walking on grass or seeing the sky without mesh wire overhead made his heart race. He realized something terrifying. The cell had become familiar. The outside had become foreign. That's when the psychological damage of solitary confinement became crystal clear. ADX didn't just punish inmates with isolation. It rewired their instincts until they feared the very thing they once longed for. Human connection. Michael spent hours pacing, trapped in a loop of anxiety. Freedom, the thing he dreamed of for years, now felt like another form of danger. And he didn't know which world he belonged in anymore. The body that doesn't feel normal anymore. Years of isolation hadn't just damaged Michael's mind. They had altered his body. His balance was off. His muscles felt weaker. His sleep cycle was broken. He flinched at sudden sounds. His eyes struggled with bright lights. Even his breathing changed, becoming shallow during moments of stress, deeper in silence. Michael realized he was physically conditioned to confinement. The narrow space, the constant dim lighting, the still air. His body had adapted to the cell's environment. It was no longer punishment. It was home. The idea of walking in open space, without walls nearby, made him dizzy. He imagined stepping into sunlight and felt fear instead of warmth. When medical staff came to evaluate him, they didn't look for physical signs of distress. They measured his reflexes, took his temperature, checked his blood pressure. But ADX damage isn't visible. It lives in the nervous system, in the muscles, in the eyes, in the heart, in the way the body forgets how to function naturally. Michael suspected that if he left ADX tomorrow, he wouldn't feel normal. He would feel exposed, overwhelmed, and out of place. The prison hadn't just changed his environment. It had changed him biologically. The emotional collapse. Michael always believed he could hold himself together emotionally. But ADX doesn't break emotions quickly. It drains them slowly. He began feeling numb. Not sadness, not anger, just nothingness. His emotions were shutting down to protect him from the stress of isolation. He stopped reacting to small things, footsteps, voices, even shouting down the tier. Everything blended into a dull gray haze. Then came days when his emotions would surge suddenly. Panic would hit him for no reason. His heart would race. His mind would spiral. Suddenly, he'd feel overwhelmed by memories or fears or regrets. This emotional whiplash exhausted him. He realized he no longer knew which feelings were natural and which were symptoms of isolation. His body didn't trust itself. His mind didn't trust itself. The emptiness inside him felt heavier than the silence around him. In ADX, emotions didn't fade. They disconnected, and reconnecting them felt impossible. The internal fight against madness. By the 14th chapter of his ADX life, the hardest enemy Michael faced wasn't the prison. It was himself. His mind had split into two versions, the one trying to stay sane and the one ADX had created. The other voice inside him had grown smarter, clearer, more persuasive. It wasn't imaginary. It was a psychological echo, the voice you develop when you spend too long thinking alone. The voice told him what to do. The voice judged him. The voice comforted him. The voice frightened him. It wasn't madness. It was survival. His brain was giving him company because nothing else would. Michael knew he had to maintain control. He forced routines. He repeated grounding phrases. He paced to stay focused. He avoided talking to the voice, even when it felt tempting. But some nights, the voice felt too real, almost like another person inside the cell. He wondered how many inmates had lost this battle. He understood the truth. Then one day, everything clicked. ADX wasn't just punishing inmates. It was shaping them. Michael sat on his bunk and realized the routines, the silence, the cells, the structure, all of it was perfectly designed to change a person permanently. Not temporarily. Not accidentally. Permanently. The system wasn't just isolating inmates. It was reprogramming them. The quiet had become a language. The walls had become familiarity. The routines had become comfort. The fear of freedom was now stronger than the fear of confinement. He understood the truth. You don't leave ADX as the same person who entered. You leave as someone ADX created. He looked around his cell, the concrete, the steel toilet, the tiny window, and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not fear, not sadness, but acceptance. A dangerous kind of acceptance. And that was when he knew ADX had completed its work. The day the silence broke. Something happened that Michael had not experienced in years. The silence broke, not with shouting, not with tapping, but with something worse. Conversation. Two guards stood outside his door, discussing a situation happening on another tier. The words weren't meant for him, but they hit him like a shockwave. Their voices were fast, urgent, human. His brain had forgotten how to process natural conversation. The tone, the pacing, the emotion, all of it felt overwhelming. Michael stood frozen, unable to move. The sound made his heart race, not from fear, but from sensory overload. It was like suddenly hearing a language you once knew, but no longer understood. The silence that had shaped his entire world was suddenly broken by something he used to crave. And it hurt. He wanted the guards to stay. He wanted them to keep talking. He wanted the noise, even though it frightened him. For the first time, Michael understood that silence wasn't the enemy anymore. Noise was. ADX had changed him so deeply that the sound of human voices felt foreign, alien, sharp, intrusive. When the guards walked away, the silence returned like a blanket. But it didn't feel comforting this time. It felt like a reminder of what he had lost. The daydreams that feel real. As months passed, Michael discovered a new symptom of isolation. Hyperrealistic daydreams. He would close his eyes for a moment and suddenly imagine a full scene, himself walking on a street, eating a meal in a diner, listening to music, standing at a bus stop. These weren't fantasies. They felt real. The smell of food, the warmth of sunlight, the hum of people talking. His brain created them to replace a world he hadn't seen in years. But the line between reality and imagination became dangerously thin. Sometimes he opened his eyes and still expected to see a street instead of his cell. Sometimes he heard people calling his name when no one was there. Sometimes he felt the sun on his skin, even though he hadn't seen sunlight in years. The daydreams were comforting at first, but then they became confusing, and then disturbing. One day he imagined walking through his old neighborhood and suddenly couldn't remember if the memory was real or invented. His brain was mixing the two, trying to keep him grounded in a world he no longer lived in. Michael wondered if he was losing his grip or if his mind was trying to save him the only way it knew how. The day everything went quiet. One morning, something happened that terrified Michael more than anything in his years at ADX. The tapping stopped. The whispers stopped. The daydream stopped. Even the voice in his mind was silent. His cell felt emptier than ever before. For years, his thoughts had created company, conversation, noise, comfort. Now nothing. He sat on the edge of his bed and listened. Nothing. He whispered to himself. Nothing. He tried to imagine a memory. Nothing. It was as if his mind had shut down from exhaustion. The internal noise that once saved him had gone quiet, and the silence was unbearable. For the first time, Michael realized something devastating. His brain was tired. Not emotionally, not mentally, biologically tired. The years of isolation had drained him so deeply that even imagination stopped working. He no longer had the strength to fight the silence. And that was the most dangerous moment of all. The cost of silence. Inside ADX Florence, some prisoners never see the sun. But the truth is deeper than darkness. It's about what isolation does to the human mind. Michael's story shows this clearly. It wasn't the walls that broke him. It wasn't the routine. It wasn't the silence. It was the years without touch, without voices, without sunlight, without humanity. ADX didn't destroy Michael with violence. It reshaped him with emptiness. This documentary isn't just about a prison cell. It's about what happens when you remove everything that makes us human and expect a person to remain the same. Michael entered ADX as a man with memories, connections, fears, dreams. He left as someone different, someone built by silence, someone built by the box. And that's the cost of total isolation. You don't just lose the world. You lose yourself. Studio microphone voices from inside, where the truth can't be locked away.